Hello all, I'm Kel Kidman and welcome to Breaking on the Daily, where today we are going to begin with the House Democrats attacking freedom of the press. In this case, they are attacking traditional news outlets that lean to the right, places like Newsmax, OANN, and Fox News. And what they are doing is they're trying to attack supposed disinformation. And this goes back to sort of the consistent thing that they have been doing over the past few months, where they have been attacking the idea of a disputed truth in favor of some sort of agreed upon lie. To read out some of the original statement, they have said, the prolonged severity of the COVID-19 pandemic and the attack on our capital on January 6th have driven home a frightening reality. The spread of disinformation and extremism by traditional media presents a tangible and destabilizing threat, said in particular, the House Committee on Energy and Commerce. And what they are proposing is they are proposing to a lot of, essentially, broadcasters, sort of, AT&T, the people who do stuff like DirecTV, Dish, and all that sort of stuff, people who host news channels and more broadly TV channels. They're suggesting, well, are you going to continue running these people? And it's funny to see this sort of thing coming out as of now, because this act on its own is leagues and orders of magnitude more than anything Donald Trump did to attack the free press during his entire presidency. Because what did Donald Trump do that they were always complaining about and calling him a fascist for doing? Well, he was criticizing the media for being dishonest. In this case, we aren't just ending at criticism, rather we're trying to get the media that the Democrats don't like completely off the air. They're specifically trying to deplatform these people. If that doesn't sound like something completely insane and utterly limiting free speech in so many ways, I don't know how to help you, because this is absurd. And one of the more, the original spots I saw this was actually on Twitter, where I saw a post about it, and the comments were very depressing. Because underneath, rather than the sort of acrimony you should expect from American people when seeing this sort of blatant censorship come out, or at least the call for it, instead you're seeing people being like, yeah, I don't like those Newsmax guys, I don't like those Fox News guys. Said that's what's happening. I wouldn't do that about CNN. If CNN was being threatened to have their entire media operation shut down, not because of their failing ratings or something like that, but rather because of government fiat, because a House committee is trying to pressure the people who are broadcasting them to stop hosting them, I would be on CNN's side in that instance. Because I am pro free speech. I am pro all of this information being out there. That is where I stand on these sorts of things. And it is absurd to see that Democrats obviously do not have that same principle. Moving on, however, to our next story. The Supreme Court of the U.S. has refused to hear a Pennsylvania election lawsuit. In this case, referring to certain things that were going on with the Pennsylvania lawsuit. You've heard about these sorts of things all over the place if you've been on my channel, or most right-wing channels that have been going on over the past few months, ever since the Hong Kong totally fair election happened. Where, in this case, we're talking about the laws that PA put into place, and specifically Pennsylvania judiciaries and Pennsylvania election officials that are not the legislator. And what it was about was determining whether those laws and regulations that were put in were constitutional or not, and whether they actually could be upheld. That's what this was meant to do. And it was denied by the SCOTUS on the grounds of mootness, which is, to put it frankly, an absurdity. Because in this case, the Supreme Court of the U.S. is not really judging based on what's going to happen with the last election. That ship has already sailed, and most, if not all, people have already accepted that, including Donald Trump himself. That's why he dropped most of his election lawsuits, except a few particular ones that were already up on the docket for the Supreme Court, this one being one of them. In this case, we are actually talking about what will happen with future elections. This election is already said and done, all right? And we have to just accept that it was honk honk totally fair. But for next time, it's important to make it clear from the SCOTUS how this sort of thing is going to work, whether you can actually change the election rules through anything that isn't the legislator, whether you can do it through the judiciary with friendly lawsuits, or whether you can do it through the executive branch with the AG and those sorts, putting in laws that weren't put in by the legislator. That's the question that's being asked here, and the SCOTUS has once again punted, which doesn't make sense. It really doesn't, because even if they weren't going to err in favor of the Pennsylvania Republicans in this case, they still need to give out a consistent rule set so that we know what to do next time, and so that we can't be blindsided by these sorts of things next time these sorts of problems come up. Right now, they are just having a complete dereliction of duty, because this constitutional question has not been answered in a lot of cases, or at least by and large it hasn't. There isn't a whole lot of precedent going either way. I mean, it seems pretty clear from how the Constitution is actually written, how this is supposed to work, that the legislators are the ones who are deciding the rules of the election. But it hasn't been ruled on very much, at least as far as I can tell. In all likelihood, because most of the time this sort of thing isn't very well contested, and isn't contested very often. But in this case, it has been. But they keep punting on it. And I do suggest, for those of you out there, to go down in the description and actually read Justice Thomas's response to all this, his dissent, because it is really good. It's really well done, and you don't need to read it all. I kind of skimmed through it myself, because it's really long, and it's really detailed and nice, and I read a few specific paragraphs and things that I found to be interesting and important, and it really was very, very interesting, a very good takedown of what was going on there. With one of his last paragraphs, I think it actually was his last paragraph, saying, why are they essentially saying what I was saying, where he was talking about why are they punting on this? They need a consistent rule set, but they're just refusing to do so. And the weird thing about this is that Amy Coney Barrett and Brett Kavanaugh voted against the writ of certiorari in this instance. Although I guess it shouldn't be too surprising, as many people were in fact warning that these two weren't exactly the sort of people you'd want to be on the court, aren't the sort of strong-willed people like you'd see from Thomas or Alito, and in this case even Gorsuch, which I was very happy to see, actually. So, it seems as though, for the time being, we have essentially 3 conservative justices and 3, maybe, but institutionalist justices. That seems to be where we're at with the court right now. And I guess we can expect that into the future. I hope they are judging better on other issues, particularly, say, guns and the like, things that are less politically contentious, unlike an election. To move on to our next story. Biden's AG pick, Merrick Garland, has been an absolute disaster because the hearings have been going on for just today. I think they began. And wow, this guy has had a lot of problems. He's made it clear throughout these hearings that, one, he doesn't know what the internet is or know pretty much anything about any of the contentious subjects that you'd expect an attorney general to know about. Things like Section 230 and the like. He doesn't seem to know anything about the Durham report or the fact that it exists, or whether he's going to even keep Durham on, or whether he's going to delete it, which is something that the Republicans should absolutely press him on more, because the Democrats did that same exact thing for AG picks in the past with the Mueller stuff. So it's an equivalent situation. I don't see why that shouldn't be applied in the same way. it's just... And one of the more contentious things he said that I take particular issue with is he said that far-left rioters attacking the federal courthouse and it was not necessarily domestic terrorism because it was at night. Because somehow the time of day matters when it comes to actually determining whether something was terrorism. So apparently, if 9/11 was happening, but it was dead of night, it was like 11 p.m., Merrick Garland wouldn't consider that terrorism, or at least would have questions about it. Because, you see, he doesn't actually rule out it being terrorism. He just says, well, I don't know. Because it's at night. It's such an absurd way to look at things. I don't know why he seems so apropos about this. I don't get it. It seems strange. Because these people were trying to burn down a federal courthouse. Explicitly. They told them they were trying to do that and showed not only impetus, but actually the means and ability to do so. Because they've been burning down the rest of the city over the past few months, and it didn't seem like they were going to stop at the courthouse. We know that was imminent, and that if the federal troops had not been there, in all likelihood, that federal courthouse would have been burned down. So it's not like it's some sort of hypothetical thing. It's not like it's the January 6th trespassing, where we're talking about, hypothetically, if this guy who seems to be LARPing around carrying zip ties for no discernible reason, if he got his hands on a congressman, maybe something would have happened. Maybe. It's not in that case, because in that case, no one actually did in real life. Only in the fantastical delusions of our Congress people did that ever happen. For the most part, they were just walking around the building. And yeah, was there violence going on as well? Sure. Absolutely. There was vandalism, and there was assaults of police officers, and all that stuff is bad, obviously, during the January 6th riot/trespasser. But a lot of people were just wandering around. And that goes for the majority of people. Even the people who we see in the actual chambers of the Senate. They're just kind of walking around. They're not doing a whole lot. Some of them got mad at other people for sitting in chairs they aren't supposed to sit in. That's how polite this riot was, this insurrection was. They still cared about the freaking seats. Ridiculous. Were there bad things that happened? Yes. And am I going to condone what happened? No. But to blow it out of proportions is utterly absurd. And also to downplay something else which is not only equivalent, but worse from any objective standpoint, like the potential burning down, the attempted burning down of a federal courthouse, is absurd. Especially to do it because it happened at night. What are you even talking about? Would the same argument be made for the January 6th protesters? No, of course not. In some alternate world, if we had gone into a world where the January 6th protesters happened at night, and they got into the Capitol at night, where no one was there, would people make the argument that they weren't domestic terrorists because they were there at night? No, because they aren't stupid. No one would defend them regardless. And even people like me, who defend them by not overplaying what they actually did, would still be saying the exact same thing. I wouldn't be defending them on that basis, because I'm not stupid. I have a basic understanding that day-night cycle does not inherently affect one's actions. So dumb. I can't fathom this. Yeah. That thing was really annoying. And there is a whole lot more annoying. And this is sort of next segment is sort of a return to one of our earlier segments about free speech and that sort of thing, where the New York Times put out an article recently about how you shouldn't go down the rabbit hole. And it lays out a way of patrolling the internet that essentially tries to keep you within the mainstream narrative as much as humanly possible. And I'm not really going to go over the actual story itself, because, to be frank, I kind of stole this story off of the Lotus Eaters, and they did a much better breakdown than I think I ever could. They have a longer podcast format than I do. So, theirs is better. I suggest you go look at it. I think I'll put it in the description, the segment that they had. And so I suggest you go check that out because it is good. And I'm not going to be covering, as I said, the actual story itself. Rather, what I'm going to be covering in this case is sort of a counter to this. A way of looking at searching and trying to discern disinformation from truth as a counter to what they said. And that is to start off with a simple and eminently reasonable assumption. And that is that every single person you meet, every single person you talk to, every single person you see online or in any other context can lie to you. Now, that doesn't initially seem contradictory with what the New York Times article was saying. However, if you look into what they're actually trying to tell you to do, they're trying to tell you, in this case, to trust particular sources, like Wikipedia, like Google, like ABC, NBC, those sorts of sources that they would consider authoritative. I don't consider any sources to be authoritative at all. I consider anyone to be able to lie to you or not lie to you. Anything that you hear, any person that you see, is equally likely or equally able to lie to you as much as they are equally likely or able to tell you the truth. Once you understand that, much of information gathering becomes a lot more simple. And though it debatably becomes harder, because once you understand that people can lie to you and everyone is able to lie to you, you much more easily are able to discern when people are actually giving you information and when they are trying to infer that certain information exists without actually giving you the information that you would need to know something. Take this for example. When you see a scientific study online and you see the results of the study, are you actually seeing any information? Are you actually being told information, or are you being told an inference of information? Are you being told as something that may refer to information, but is not information itself? Well, in most cases, you are actually seeing the latter, because what you are seeing is the conclusion of the study. In order to see the actual information of the study, you need to go into the details. You need to look into what was actually going on, into things like the methodology, into things like the actual results of the study without the conclusions of the researchers slapped on top of it. Once you get to that point, once you get to the actual information that you may get from the study, it becomes a lot easier to discern whether that information is accurate or whether it's hiding some sort of nefarious purpose. Because, especially when it comes to methodology, some say the devil is in the details. I personally am of the opinion that the devil is in the methodology, as I think I've made it myself clear over time. When I'm referring to models as a scourge of the earth and the scourge of the scientific community by and large, I am referring to the methodology of any given study. When I look into the methodology of a study and I see things like models or assumptions of efficacy of certain things or any of that sort of language, I immediately assume that this sort of study, this study in particular, is trying to sell me on something. It isn't trying to actually give me information in a impartial way, in a scientific way, empirical way. It is actually trying to convince me of a particular policy. Take most math studies, for example. Most math studies, and the Germany study is as one that I will bring up constantly, being a prime example of such, assumes in its methodology the efficacy of its policy that it is advocating for. It assumes, as one of its core assumptions in the methodology, that mass-reduce viral transmission by something like 70%. Thus, it is not surprising that once they apply that number to the actual numbers in Germany, and then just create their new numbers, their new set of numbers that were created through that model, it would not be surprising then that their conclusion is, well, masks work. Because that was their assumption to begin with. So the information they're actually giving me is literally nothing, other than the biases that are given from the scientists. And this sort of methodology can be applied to almost any sort of information, anything that you're looking for. And really, do go down the rabbit hole, but you need to be careful to understand that anyone can lie to you. Because there is a certain novelty bias that many people have. In a lot of cases, I've seen people be tricked by lies and misinformation, most commonly by actually encountering novel information that fills a few gaps in their normal understanding of the world or understanding of a particular subject. And when they see something that fills a couple holes that they had, they will then assume that everything else is also accurate from that source. When in fact, in most cases actually, the novel information itself is not inherently better than the information beforehand, and in a lot of cases has just as many, if not more holes than what they were left with before. And so you do need to be careful of that novelty bias, because as you look into more information, you're going to have examples and have urges yourself to believe particular novel information that you see, and sometimes believe the first thing that you see. That's why Google search results are such a powerful thing, because since things are on the first page, you are of the immediate assumption that these are, one, the most popular things, which is somewhat of a fair assumption, as you'd expect from a search engine that is at least ostensibly based on popularity in searches. But two, is the most accurate information, because why else would it be the most popular? But of course, that's a fallacy. So it is important to keep that sort of thing in mind. But really, if I'm going to impart to anything onto you through this sort of spiel I've had, it is that anyone can lie to you. It is that any source, no matter how primary, no matter how close to the actual event itself is, it can lie to you. It can be false. Because the fact of the matter is, we are all humans. And this seems like a common understanding. This seems like something that would be obvious to most anyone around. But if you look into the credentialism, if you look into the institutionalism that exists rampant throughout our entire society and has for the entirety of human civilization, it is obvious that many people, including people who claim to be scientifically minded, do not believe that everyone is just as human as everyone else. It becomes more and more obvious once you see all of the sort of nonsense that goes on within the scientific community. It's not an impugnment of science, of course. Most of the time, when it comes to my criticisms of particular examples in the scientific community, in the scientific establishment, that is an example of science being wrong. It's an example of science being corrupted and ceasing, thus, to be science itself. That's what I kind of want to impart to you today. And I think that's where I'm going to have to leave off that rant, which I hope you enjoyed, and if you did, share the video to whoever you think would like it. As well, subscribe below wherever you are, unless it's on YouTube, in which case subscribe anywhere else with those pretty links down in the description where you can see where I am everywhere. If you want to see my thoughts, I'm either on Minds or Gab or Parler or wherever, whatever's working the best, frankly. And that's all. I'm Kelt Kidman, this has been Breaking on the Daily, and I'm out.